We are super excited to be here today with Dr. Angie Sadeghi. Now, when it comes to the human wellness experience, Dr. Angie says, "My passion is to provide healing through an integrative approach to keep my patients healthy and youthful." Dr. Angie Sadeghi is a diplomat of the American Board of Internal Medicine and a diplomat of the American Board of Gastroenterology. She has extensive training from the prestigious University of Southern California, and she demonstrates an exceptional commitment to excellence in treating diseases of the digestive tract. Dr. Angie's own personal journey fueled her desire to help her patients. 5 years ago, she switched to a plant-based lifestyle and adopted a regular fitness routine into her life. She had previously suffered from health problems like eczema, elevated cholesterol, fatigue, and excess body weight. She started eating a whole food plant-based diet and transformed her body completely. For this reason, she decided to start helping her patients do the exact same thing. Dr. Angie understands that no single approach is right for every individual. So she offers a complete range of services to help individuals with gut problems, with obesity, with anti-aging, with diabetes, heart disease, arthritis, chronic fatigue, chronic pain, and overall disease prevention. Dr. Angie has developed a comprehensive approach to helping patients recover from illness and live a truly healthy life. Additionally, she's part of a new movement called the Plantrition Project, which empowers individuals with the knowledge and the benefits of whole food, plant-based nutrition. So thank you so much for being here today, Dr. Angie. We're really, really excited to have you.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on your podcast.
Fantastic. So, we've talked a lot in previous interviews about how eating a low-fat, plant-based whole food diet reduces the calorie density of meals in comparison to a low-carbohydrate diet or a high-fat, high-protein diet. Given your expertise in gastroenterology and treating diseases of the gut, can you explain to our audience how your digestive system and brain communicate when you eat foods that are fiber rich?
Yes, that's a very good question. So fiber, as you know, is a very, very important component of the digestive tract. We used to think that when you eat fiber, it just goes in one end and comes out the other end with no processes in between and no digestion. We used to think that it's just a tube, mouth to anus, tortuous long tract with about 17 enzymes that come out of the pancreas to digest and break down the food, such as the proteins, the carbs, and the fats, and pretty much synthesize some vitamins, things get absorbed, and that's about it. Well, in the last couple of decades, we have come to understand that there is an entire world of gut microbiome who are mouth to anus, basically contributing in a very symbiotic relationship with the human body, and they are doing most of the digestion and processing of the food. And in particular, carbohydrates are a very important component of the GI tract for the gut microbiome, and fiber happens to be an important necessary macronutrient for the gut microbiome. And without the fiber, the gut microbiome would be unhealthy. And the protective layer of the gut microbiome would disintegrate. And it would expose us to a lot of illnesses because the bacteria toxins can get right into your blood without a protective shield. So fiber is an absolute necessity. I remember 20 years ago when I went to these obesity conferences, they would have these people who would come and talk about keto diets, and they would say something about, you don't even need to eat carbs. Carbs are unnecessary. We don't need it for to live. Well, I'm happy to say that with the knowledge that we have of the gut microbiome and the gut and gut health, we know that carbohydrates are an absolute must for the health of the GI tract. And without it, we can't live. So it's very important. When it comes to calorie density, we used to think that portion controlling is the way to go. So you eat badly and you eat all kinds of fat-rich and sugar-rich foods, but as long as you keep your portions small, then you're fine. Well, we know that that's not good for the gut microbiome at all, and it's not good for your health. But in particular, then you leave yourself hungry. So with the whole food plant-based diet, what you do is when you eat large meals, you don't even have to limit your portions. You can eat very, very large plates of food so you're not left hungry. It's satiating because when it goes into the GI tract, it produces a hormone called GLP-1. GLP-1 has a feedback loop onto your digestive system and your system in general, and it basically puts a brake on the stomach and gives you a feel of satiety. And so pretty much you feel full, and you don't feel like you're hungry all the time. So that's why when, as a bariatric physician, and even my patients who have diabetes, I encourage them to eat a whole food plant-based diet and fiber-rich meals. So they're not hungry, they're eating as much as they want, and they're getting all these micronutrients out of their food. And also, basically helping the digestive system be robust and healthy. I also want to touch on brain-gut connection. We used to think that when you're depressed, and it's because there is serotonin deficiency in your brain or some kind of a neurotransmitter deficiency in your brain. And so what we would do is we would use these powerful antidepressants like serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which would basically inhibit basically increase the serotonin levels in your brain synapses. The serotonin levels are sitting there in between two neurons, and as long as the levels are high, you would get results. So now we know that most of the serotonin, about 90% of the serotonin, is actually made in the gut. So it's early on, and right now we're still at the early stages of it. We're still treating patients with antidepressants, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that because depression is multifactorial. But I'm here to tell you that a major component of a healthy gut, it's very, very important to have a healthy gut, because a major amount of serotonin, which is quote unquote the feel-good neurotransmitter, is made actually by the gut cells. So when you eat badly, and when you're not eating a fiber-rich food or diet, it's affecting your gut cells, and it's affecting the health of your gut function. And therefore, you could foresee how that could end up causing depression and problems down the line, besides metabolic diseases and besides all those other diseases that are obvious, but also depression would be on the list. So, then one would say, well, why do you think that a fiber-rich diet is good for the health of the whole system and for the brain? Well, and that's because it's very simple. The gut microbiome consists of different organisms. There are 100 trillion organisms that live in the gut. And mouth to anus, they are basically dispersed along the GI tract. The GI tract acidity, alkalinity changes as it goes down the line. And each gut microbiome lives in its own habitat based on the type of environment they like to live in, whether it's acidic, alkaline, or whatever. Now, these gut microbiome consist of two different populations, to make it simple. We have the healthy gut microbiome and we have the unhealthy gut microbiome. Whereas the unhealthy gut microbiome thrives on unhealthy foods like pure sugar or fat, or, and I mean saturated animal fat, and choline and lecithin-rich meals. The healthy gut microbiome thrives on fiber-rich foods that come from whole foods and plants. So what you can do, you can literally manipulate your gut microbiome and the health of your gut to increase the serotonin production. That's an indirect step, but let me explain. If you're eating a whole food plant-based diet, fiber-rich, you are producing something called short-chain fatty acids that actually are protective to the gut layer and heal the gut layer and keep inflammation down. So therefore, what you can do is your gut can be functioning better and producing all these feel-good hormones such as serotonin, and kind of like put out inflammation. and basically overall contribute to healing and health. Whereas if you're eating all the bad foods that cause inflammation, you can do the opposite. You can basically have vascular disease, depression, irritable bowel syndrome, SIBO, and we'll talk about that in more detail. But the message here is, if you want a healthy brain, you have to have a healthy gut. And by that, very simply put, increase your fiber.
This is so fascinating and so clear how the gut is affecting so many different aspects of human health. And you addressed a big question a lot of people have. They hear is carbohydrate-rich foods are not essential. You don't need them. But you just explained why this is so important. So thank you very much. You touched on calorie density a little bit, but I want to go into that just a little bit more detail. So some people, when they switch to a low-fat, plant-based whole food diet, they say they don't feel full. So what advice would you give to somebody who's having that experience?
My suggestion to my patients is eat more. You don't have to limit yourself. A lot of times people are envious of me because I eat like 6 times a day and I eat whatever I want. And I have big meals, and people look at me like, I can't believe you're like only 5'1" or 5'2" and you're eating that much. I'm like, well, I don't like to restrict myself. I don't like to eat very little and leave the table thinking, man, I wish I could eat more. I want to be on the type of diet that allows me to be unrestricted as far as the volume of food I want to eat. And with the whole food plant-based diet, because it's fiber rich, it's very bulky and it carries a lot of water. So like think about eating a banana or an apple or an orange. These foods are full of water, so you can eat volumes and volumes of it, and your stomach fills up, and the stretch receptors give a signal back to your brain where, oh, we're full now. You don't need to eat anymore. Whereas if you, for example, had a spoon of oil, so think about, you can eat a large bowl of salad and that would be 150 calories or 200 calories, or you can eat one tiny bit of oil. And so in your stomach, the oil sits there like a little pea in a large pot. It doesn't it doesn't stimulate the stretch receptors, and it doesn't tell your brain you're full. But if you're eating a whole bowl of salad full of vegetables, the stretch receptors tell your body, I'm full, stop eating, right? And you could potentially get the same number of calories. Now think about how many powerful macro and micronutrients you're getting with the salad and how little you're getting with the oil, and how harmful that is for the GI tract. And I want to talk about high-fat diets and how that causes leaky gut later. But so fiber is essential in giving you that bulk to help your stretch receptors to feel satiety, but also the hormonal regulations of fiber. Like I said, GLP-1 and other hormones, which also help you feel satiated when you eat a fiber-rich diet.
This is awesome. There's so many directions that we could go from here. I'm like fascinated. I want to talk about all of these different things. Okay. One thing that I do know is true is that there's some people who, when they transition to a low-fat, plant-based whole food diet, or just a plant-based diet in general, they actually experience more gas, more bloating, and more abdominal pain. Why does that happen?
I love you for asking that question, because that seems to be the number one question I get. And it's very important that I clarify this. So Cyrus, when it comes to gut microbiome and digestion, we as human beings have only about 17 enzymes that come out of the pancreas when you eat through hormonal regulations. And these 17 enzymes can break down food. However, the gut microbiome on their own have thousands and thousands of digestive capabilities, okay? So you could say that we are not even digesting food. It's the gut microbiome that's doing most of the work. When it comes to the gut microbiome, I wanna make this very clear. I want all your listeners to remember. The most important thing is gut microbiome diversity. Diversity is key in a healthy digestive tract and a healthy gut microbiome population. How do you increase diversity? By eating different types of fiber, by eating different types of fruits and vegetables, by eating different types of plant foods. That's how you increase diversity. There isn't just 1 or 2 types of gut microbiome in the gut. Mouth to anus, we have 100 trillion. I don't even know what that means, 100 trillion. I mean, think about how big that is, right? It's not even tangible. But what you can think about is the diversity is important, and the healthy diversity is important. Okay, how do you increase the diversity? By eating various number of different types of plants. That's how you increase the diversity, and that's how you improve digestion. Unfortunately, Cyrus and Robbie, as you guys are aware, in the last couple of decades, we've had these horrible fad diets on the market, which have done the exact opposite. We've had the keto diet. We've had these low-carb diets that have starved our gut microbiome down to very low diversity. So when you're not eating carbs, when you're not eating fiber-rich foods, and I'm not talking about pure sugar, I'm talking about fruits and vegetables here, you are starving the gut microbiome and you're reducing the diversity to very few types of healthy gut microbiome. So what happens when you suddenly wake up and you listen to Robbie and Cyrus on a podcast or something, and you listen to your video about 5 reasons why you shouldn't be on a keto diet, and you go, bingo, this is the answer to my prayers. I'm so glad I listened to this, and I'm not going to eat that bad food anymore. I'm not going to be on this shitty keto diet. I'm going to change my life overnight, and I'm going to go eat whole food plant-based. All right, so unfortunately what happens is when you start eating all that fiber, your gut doesn't know what to do with it because your digestibility has been restricted. You are now introducing foods that the gut microbiome doesn't know anything about. The diversity is very low, and the amount of good gut microbiome that are able to digest that fiber are pretty low in number or non-existent. So what I suggest to my patients is what we do with inflammatory bowel disease patients who are actually worse off, because with inflammation, your entire gut microbiome is just completely destroyed. The protective layer of the gut is destroyed. There's a lot of problem with that. So what I usually do is I go transition slowly. You can, if you have IBS, if you have dysbiosis, if you have gut problems, if you have IBD, you can't literally go overnight without help. I have a team of dietitians who help me transition patients who want to go overnight with easy to digest foods like root vegetables that are cooked, all cooked foods. And we sort of try to eliminate some of the harder to digest foods like beans and legumes until later. We slowly transition them. But if you're listening and you don't have help, you don't have a help of a dietitian or a doctor, the message is to go slow. You have to eat all cooked foods that are easier to digest. As opposed to raw foods like raw broccoli and things like that, or beans, and you have to go slowly. And there's nothing wrong with not going whole food plant-based overnight. I understand. My suggestion to my patients is first, for the first month, just stop eating dairy. That is the biggest poison for the GI tract, because we don't even know. We're not cows, so we don't know how to digest dairy. It's very simple. So stop eating the dairy. Then slowly start avoiding the meats. And in the interim, you can very carefully re-inoculate the gut with some gut microbiome and prebiotics, and start feeding the good gut microbiome, and slowly go into a whole food plant-based diet. And then once you graduate, you can eat all the legumes you want, 3 cans a day if you want, and you can eat all the raw foods you want, and you'll be fine. But it's a slow process, and you have to respect the gut microbiome. But the point here is, you guys, my suggestion is don't give up. This is maybe 2 to 3 months of gas and bloating and torture for long-term benefits and health. So don't give up. Just go slow. Rome wasn't built in one day, and your gut microbiome is not going to be built in one day. It's going to take about 3 months.
This is such important information, and these nuanced details are what people need to hear. And I've met your dietitian team, and they're amazing. I know you guys do telemedicine, so we'll give people the information if they want to connect with you, so they'll know how to do that.
Yes.
Now, let's go into a little bit more about IBS. So is it possible to reverse IBS, IBD, or do you have to just manage those symptoms?
I love that question. Okay, so as you know, I literally see IBS patients every day. So we used to think, Robbie, this is interesting. We used to think these IBS patients are crazy. We used to think like, it's all in your head. You don't have pain. Go home and do your thing. Stop complaining. We have a whole different level of respect for IBS patients and the suffering that goes with it. And by the way, we're seeing more and more IBS as the standard American diet is more and more the diet that's in around America. as we incorporate more meat and dairy, we're seeing more and more IBS here in America. And so I see hundreds and hundreds of patients per month and year. So about IBS, is it reversible and is it treatable? So let me tell you a little history. So obviously these people are not crazy. It turns out that there's a gut microbiome balance. And the way we found that is that there was a New England Journal of Medicine article that came out recently. And they found out that the patients with irritable bowel syndrome, in particular with diarrhea, have a lot of hydrogen producing gut microbiome. And they have an overgrowth of gut microbiome and small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, in particular with hydrogen-producing gut microbiome. And when we put them on an antibiotic called rifaximin, and by the way, I don't work for rifaximin, the company Salix, I'm just telling you what the study showed. They, when they gave these patients this antibiotic, which eradicated the hydrogen-producing gut microbiome and took away the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, the IBS got better. The patients suddenly had less diarrhea, less gas and bloating, and a better quality of life. Their stools formed up. So suddenly the IBS went away. And that made people think, could IBS be pretty much an imbalance of gut microbiome? And the answer is yes. We are still learning, and there's a lot to know, but this was a very important landmark paper that helped us understand IBS better. So with that, I personally have implemented nutrition therapy in treating IBS and reversing IBS. So that's really key, reversing IBS with nutrition. Unfortunately, nowadays, the doctors, some other GI doctors, what they do is they keep giving their rifaximin, second round and the third round. And the paper said no more than 2 rounds. But, then what? What are you going to do? Keep taking rifaximin? By the way, it's $1,200. The one course of it. Okay. Now, I wish I had stocks in Salix. I don't. If I did, I would be a millionaire. But what's happening is these doctors keep putting patients on antibiotics. Let's stop and take a step back. How about, here's a novel idea, how about treating patients with nutrition to help with a robust, balanced gut microbiome and not get this overgrowth? By helping patients with nutrition. And so that's what I'm doing. I usually, most of the time, 99% of the time, have to use the antibiotic once to get patients at a level where they're able to eat, and boom, then I help them with diet, and lo and behold, the IBS doesn't come back most of the time. So that's how you reverse IBS. So it's doable.
Some of the reading that I've actually done about rifaximin and how it works is that I've seen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've seen a lot of medical professionals will administer one course of rifaximin. People will start to see a lot of improvement in their digestive health. And then as soon as that course is done, if they return to their previous diet, then over the course of time, SIBO kicks back in one more time, IBS kicks back in, IBD kicks back in. But it's only once they go through a course of rifaximin and then start to transition to a fiber-rich, plant-heavy diet, that's when you can actually limit the ability of SIBO and IBD to start once again. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And that's exactly what I'm doing for my patients, Cyrus. You can't, if there are a lot of patients who are suffering so badly that I start them on rifaximin. But if they continue to eat that way, if they're continuing to eat poorly, that rifaximin is not the end all and be all. The SIBO is going to return. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And for some people, it comes back within 2 months. For some people, it comes back within 6 months, but it will come back. That's a guarantee. And unfortunately, if the GI doctor does not talk about diet, what happens is people go back on the same exact diet, right? The low carb, they're all trying to lose weight and they think the low carb way is the best way. And literally they go on these fad diets and the SIBO comes back with a vengeance.
That's exactly right. So one of the things that you touched on earlier here is that you said that diets that are high in fat cause leaky gut syndrome, which is very interesting because if you go into the low carbohydrate world, the paleo world, the ketogenic world, they tell you the exact opposite. They will tell you that it's carbohydrates that are causing leaky gut syndrome. and they will teach you to eat foods that are less fiber rich and to eat more high fat, more high protein foods, because that's actually the solution to leaky gut syndrome.
Yeah.
What is happening? Can you explain the actual pathology?
Okay, I would love to do that, but first, because I'm going to dive into that because it's just such an important topic, and I love you for asking that question. But let me ask you a question, a rhetorical question. How many of these paleo and keto people do not understand what carbohydrates are? How many of them equate carbohydrates with pure sugar, right?
I would say actually an overwhelming majority, because one of the things that we see all the time is people use the word sugar, blood sugar, diabetes sugar, pancreas, oversecrete insulin. And it's like, no, that's not the right word. Carbohydrate, especially when it comes from a whole food, does not act like sugar. And that's one of the tenets of our platform. So I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yes. So I have the same problem with my patients because they go low carb because they think high fiber rich food is equivalent to sugar and pure sugar. Anyway, so that's the problem. So when these low carb people advise people to go on a low carb diet, what they're failing to convey is we're not talking about fiber rich vegetables. We're talking about candy, Snicker bars, Skittles. So that's really important. I am not suggesting anybody eating pure sugar or Skittles. That is not good for the gut microbiome. But I would rather have Skittles than have a high-fat diet, and I'll explain to you how that works. We now have animal studies that are very, very clear, whereas the government and as you know, the dietetics organizations around the country are recommending that no more than 30% of your diet should be fat. Unfortunately, most people are eating way more fat than that. And unfortunately, they're consuming unhealthy fats. So when they did these studies in the gut microbiome and the health of the GI tract in animals, they realized that when they gave these rats and these mice the standard American diet, high in saturated fat and cholesterol, what happened is within days, the gut microbiome shifted to more of an unhealthy gut microbiome. And they also noticed that the tight junctions between the cells, so just to put it simply, cells are attached to each other by what we call tight junctions. These tight junctions, in intercellular tight junctions, keep this GI tract robust, and it's like a shield where antigens and LPS and all those bacteria antigens cannot get into the blood, and they cannot traverse from inside of the lumen of the GI tract into the blood and into your system. So what happens is these cells are here and the tight junctions break up, so now the cells have a gap in between them. So when you eat toxins, endotoxins, for example, when you eat meat, you cook the meat, the endotoxins that are in the meat, they're heat sensitive. They're not heat sensitive. They don't die out. So they walk right into the GI tract and into your blood system. But what happens is when you eat a high fat diet, high in saturated fat and animal fat, what happens is you're disturbing the tight junctions and they're sitting apart and the gates are open. So all these toxins can come right through. Furthermore, research shows that when you eat a high-fat diet, the protective layer of the digestive tract disintegrates. This is like a little protective mucus layer. And what happens is the gut bacteria actually eats the gut the gut microbiome that wants fiber. They basically are not getting enough fiber, so they start digesting your own mucus layer. So you literally have no defense mechanism, right? It's like going into war without a shield. You are totally exposed. You know, it's like going into the war field and going, here, shoot me. You're not hiding from the enemy and you're not wearing a protective layer. That's how the digestive system works too. There's got to be a little protective proteoglycans, as we call it. It's a protective layer in the gut. Furthermore, the tight junctions. Now you take away the proteoglycans because you're starving your inner self. You're starving your gut microbiome because you're eating a low fiber diet. And then you put these gap junctions in between the cells, and you're just inviting the enemy, come right over, baby, I'm ready. And so then you wonder why you have gut problems. Then you wonder why you have diabetes. Then you wonder why you have all these different problems, coronary disease, kidney disease. It all stems from the GI tract.
You're making me excited to go eat some more plants. Now, when I eat them, I'm going to be I'm protecting myself. This is great.
Judging from what's behind you, I'm sure you're not lucky.
So many people who follow a low carbohydrate diet, they struggle with constipation. So can you explain to us why that is a common problem with people following a low carb diet?
Yes, great question. Great question. So fiber is such a magical macronutrient. I love fiber. So fiber has a few different properties. Number one, there is fiber that works in more of as an osmotic laxative. So fiber is not a laxative. It actually, what it does is if you're having diarrhea, it bulks your stool, and if you're having constipation, it smooths up the stool and it helps stimulate the gut to have balance. So it normalizes you, right? It's God's given natural, basically medicine for the gut. It normalizes your balance. Now, if you went to get a laxative over the counter, you get diarrhea if you take too much, because if you're having constipation, you take a bunch of Miralax or Dulcolax, you'll get diarrhea. If you're having diarrhea and you take a laxatives, you take antidiarrheal medicines, you go overboard and get constipation. So fiber is the only thing in the world that is basically normalizes your bowels. But how does it do that? Well, this is how. There are a couple of mechanisms. Number one, there is insoluble fiber that acts as an osmotic laxative, which means that it's able to drag some water down into your colon and basically make your stool more hydrated. When you drink water, and this drives me crazy, you go on these crazy blogs on the internet and people go, drink more water and exercise. Really? How is that going to take away your constipation? There is no literature out there that drinking more water is going to help you poop better, sorry, or have better bowel movements. That is not true, folks. You can drink 11 liters of water and all 11 liters will pretty much leak into your blood and you'll pee it out through your kidneys. That's not how you moisten the stools or bring water down into your colon. The only way to do it is eat fiber-rich foods that drag some of this water into your colon. Your body is meant not to really, primary function of your body is not to poop regularly. The primary function of your body is to make sure that it recycles all the water you drink so you don't die of dehydration. So drinking more water is not going to help you. Neither is fitness. You can work out all you want. It's not going to stimulate your gut to go. So you've got to drink water, but you also have to eat enough fiber to let this water get dragged out into your colon. Furthermore, what people don't understand is 90% of your stool is bacteria. So if you do not eat a healthy, fiber-rich diet, you cannot bulk your stool well enough, and it's first of all it's dehydrated to begin with, and then you're not getting stool bulking. So then you end up like pooping these rabbit pellets, and you're straining so hard you're going to blow a vessel in your brain because you're straining so hard, and it hurts. But you know what you have to do is basically eat more vegetables, and so that bulks your stool because you're basically feeding the gut microbiome, and you're basically increasing the bulk of the stool, and that stool happens to be rich in water because of the osmotic properties of the fiber. Furthermore, for reasons we don't know exactly, fiber tends to be stimulating in the gut. And that is a property still being studied, but somehow it stimulates the nerves of the GI tract. Somehow it has some kind of a paracrine or endocrine function. Somehow it stimulates the GI tract. We know it's stimulating. We don't know exactly how, but it probably has to do with what Cyrus and I were discussing earlier, the facts that the short chain fatty acids are healing to the gut and they decrease inflammation. They stimulate perhaps the nerves, through a paracrine function, they stimulate the nerves of the GI tract. But overall, those are the three main mechanisms how constipation could go away if you eat a high carb, high fiber, whole food plant-based diet.
Okay, this is a perfect segue actually into our next conversation here, because you mentioned earlier that serotonin, something like, I think you said 90% of serotonin production happens inside of your gut. And that serotonin actually is a signal for your brain that actually improves cognition and makes you as a happier individual. One thing that we have noticed over the course of time is that in a lot of our clients living with diabetes, will find that immediately when they become stressed due to anything in their life, work, family, job, you name it, as soon as that stress kicks in, digestive function goes out the door. So it's almost the reverse, right? You all of a sudden you start with stress inside of your head, and then that negatively impacts your digestive health. Can you talk to us a little bit about what is that communication and how does that unfold?
Yeah, we have a lot of serotonin receptors in the gut too, and that's why when people go on SSRIs, their bowel functions sometimes normalize. So that could be one mechanism. This is actually a very good topic, but it's multifactorial. It could be the hormonal regulations, for example, progesterone and estrogen. It could be thyroid. It could be the serotonin. That is multifactorial. Unfortunately, we don't really have really good studies to prove how stress affects the GI tract. But if I were to guess, it has to do with serotonin. It has to do with all the endocrine regulations, with the hormones, and it has to be multifactorial. But for sure, I hear it all the time in the clinic that stress affects people. People tell me their IBD gets worse, their IBS gets worse, and I really think stress has a lot to do with it. Now, we need more data to prove this and back this up scientifically.
Okay, but it's good to know actually that you have seen this in the clinic, because we've seen it, anecdotally amongst a lot of our clients. But the fact that you're actually seeing it in your clinic is proof that, yeah, in fact, there is a real connection here. It's a two-way signaling system.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we have another very important question for you. This is something we hear a lot about in World of Diabetes Health: gastroparesis, which can be very painful and prevent people from eating large amounts of food. So can you explain what gastroparesis is and what people can do about it if they're living with it?
Yes. So to begin with, obviously, the glycosylation of the nerves and the nerve endings, when you have diabetes, advanced diabetes, what happens is over time, the nerves get damaged. Now, nature has it. Nature is kind to us. Nature has it that neuropathy and retinopathy and nephropathy comes first before the GI tract goes. So simply put, nature has it so it keeps your GI tract intact until the very end stages of diabetes. So at the beginning, you'll have some kidney damage, you'll have some nerve damage in your legs, you'll have some eye damage, but at the very end stages, what happens is, unfortunately, diabetes attacks the nerves of the stomach. And so for a very long time, while you have diabetes, the GI tract stays intact, because without the GI tract, you die. So nature has it so it's kind to us, where the GI tract is the last hit. But when that happens, you really have to really change your diet, because you are hitting the last stages of diabetes. And by the time the nerves of the GI tract goes, it becomes an extremely poor quality of life and a really big problem. So with diabetes, we have done, when you do testing in diabetes, diabetic patients with uncontrolled diabetes, we know that the nerves become quote unquote lazy. And when the nerves of the stomach become lazy, what happens is they get something called gastroparesis, which in English means the stomach is not squeezing very well. The stomach is usually a sac where it doesn't do much of the digestion and absorption. All it does is it receives the food from the esophagus, and slowly, during an act of peristalsis, pushes the food in small boluses into the duodenum, where most of everything happens, like digestion from the pancreatic juices and absorption and synthesis of vitamins by the gut microbiome. Now, when you have gastroparesis, this squeezability pretty much diminishes, and the food sits in the stomach for hours and hours. I have done endoscopies in patients with diabetes where I found food from 2 days prior in their stomach when I was inside their stomach. All right. Wow. So by the way, a lot of people get the stomach and the abdomen mixed up. The abdomen is where all your bowels and your GI tract sits. The stomach is that little sac that is after the esophagus, before the duodenum. So it's just that little sac that just squeezes and sends the food in boluses into the small bowel. When you have gastroparesis, you have very little peristaltic action, and the stomach is not squeezing, and the food just sits there for hours and days. And that's called gastroparesis. Now, what can you do about that? Recently, there was a lot of excitement about, oh, there's these stimulators you can put in the stomach and it fires up the nerves and the nerves work. But, you guys, all of those heroic things are so limited in efficacy. And I feel like one of the best things my patients, I've taught my patients to do is eat a whole food plant-based diet and try to reverse their diabetes, and the nerves will come back to a certain limit, but it's better than having stimulators put in your body and getting to that realm of those end stage heroic measures, which are very, very low efficacy anyway. So with gastroparesis, unfortunately, Robbie, it hurts me, but other doctors tell patients don't eat any fiber. So what happens is they end up screwing up their GI tract even more because they're not eating fiber. Now, what's the most intelligent thing to do? Well, you don't want to make your diabetes worse, right? So you should be on a whole food plant-based diet. What can you do? Well, just eat easy to digest foods like cooked vegetables and fruits. And that doesn't make your gastroparesis worse, does it? Now, I understand. If you have severe gastroparesis, don't go eat a bunch of raw broccoli. That may not work. But what does it do for you when you avoid all this fiber? Oh, and by the way, those same doctors will tell them eat steak. Really? So if fiber-rich foods are hard to digest, think about steak that sits there for like 3 days and putrefies. So it's really a problem. It's an awful, awful thing. And guess what? The gut microbiome is stimulating to the gut. Remember, we talked about that, right? So if you avoid the fiber-rich foods, because supposedly in gastroparesis you're not supposed to eat fiber-rich foods, which is wrong, but then what you're doing is taking away the action of the gut microbiome, and then down the line you're going to have more problems with quote-unquote leaky gut, quote-unquote, with screwing up the digestive system. And then these diabetics get severe constipation or severe diarrhea. Then they get put on these medicines that cause side effects. Oh my gosh, there's no end to this problem, right? It becomes such a vicious cycle. So gastroparesis is an important disease. It's very common, and especially diabetic gastroparesis is very common. And we have to educate our patients. That's why I'm so proud of you guys, because you're educating them about the importance of continuing to eat fiber, not eat less of it, eat more of it. And down the line, you're going to have a better outcome.
100%. It's funny because so many of these digestive problems that we've touched on today, whether it's leaky gut, whether it's dysbiosis, whether it's gastroparesis, whether it's IBD, IBS, a lot of these have their roots in eating foods that are fiber poor and in eating foods that tend to be, from the animal world that are high in protein and high in fat, or high in saturated fat, we'll say. Okay? So there's a commonality here, because as you're going through and you're explaining to us, well, what causes gastroparesis? What inflames IBD? What causes leaky gut syndrome? The same argument keeps coming back to the table, back to the table, back to the table. And we look for the solution, and the solution is, okay, well, eat foods that are more fiber rich. And if it's causing you problems in the short term, then slow down your intake of fiber and do it over the course of time, because it's not a race, right? And it just so turns out that, as we've talked about in thousands of other interviews, and that you've also experienced with your clients, when you eat more fiber-rich foods, your calorie density comes down, the micronutrient value of your food goes up. Oh, hey, by the way, type 2 diabetes also tends to go away, right? So it's really just kind of a very simple system that has a lot of evidence-based logic behind it. But yet I think what most people get confused by is, as soon as they turn on the internet and they go to Google and they say, how do I get rid of gastroparesis? Then all of a sudden, boom, they get hit with information that's actually the exact opposite of the evidence-based approach.
Right, absolutely.
So, that's a long-winded way of me saying thank you for doing what you do. Thank you for helping people overcome metabolic dysfunctions. Thank you for helping people with their digestive problems, because there seems to be that there's no end to these digestive problems. The things that we're dealing with today didn't seem to exist or weren't as prevalent 20, 30, 40 years ago. I remember when I was a kid, people weren't talking about gluten intolerance. People weren't talking about IBD as much. But all of a sudden, it's become a much bigger problem. 20 years into the future, I hope that there aren't more digestive concerns that are brought to the table. But my gut tells me that if Americans and people living with diabetes don't change their habits and continue to follow this sort of, non-evidence-based approach, that the digestive concerns are going to get worse.
100%.
So thank you. Please keep up the good work. You're also, tell our audience, you're in the new movie coming up called Diet Fiction. Is that right?
Yes. And you are too. I'm excited about this.
Yeah, exactly. So in that movie, what is it that you talk about?
So let me think about this. I talked about one that jumps out at me. I talked about dairy, and they asked me a question of why do you think a lot of doctors recommended their patients to eat dairy when dairy is bad for you, right? And I talked about how, well, most doctors do not have the nutritional expertise to talk about nutrition, and they don't know, they haven't studied it. And also, it is so indoctrinated in our country, in our culture, to get calcium from dairy, which is the worst form of which is the worst food you could eat for calcium. It's like drinking soda for potassium. And the awareness is low, where people think they have to have dairy for calcium. So unfortunately, when you ask a doctor, where do I get my calcium? They say, oh, eat more milk, or eat more cheese, or drink more milk, right? Because they don't know, well, tahini has calcium, almonds, vegetables have calcium, right? But so it's the lack of knowledge, and it's so indoctrinated in our country to eat dairy and calcium. The dairy industry has amazing propaganda and great commercials to ingrain in people's brains that basically when you think of calcium, you think of dairy. It is propaganda, and it's not the only source of calcium. And so it was a soundbite, but I just said, well, it's so indoctrinated in our country to eat it. And so unfortunately, that's the way it is. And so it's up to us to change people's minds and realize that there are other ways to get calcium.
Absolutely. Well, I'm excited to watch this movie. I'm excited to see you in it. And thanks again for taking the time to be with us here today. I learned a lot in the process, and I know that our audience here who is dealing with some form of digestive discomfort, there's so many nuggets to hear that they can take away from and really help them understand what is happening inside of their digestive tract and how is that actually going to change over the course of time as they continue on a plant-based approach.
And before we go, please tell everybody where they can find you online.
Sure. www.drangiehealth.com. drangiehealth.com. And I do have a few really awesome dietitians who specialize in gut health. And if people want to slowly, gently transition into a whole food plant-based diet, and they want to incorporate some finesse in there and not experience too much gas and bloating, we have a protocol available for them to follow.